Congratulations, Canada! We finally cracked the code on what a functional modern economy looks like. It turns out, it's one where you work yourself to the bone, only to discover that 1 in 3 families is now spending more than half of every single dollar they earn just to keep the mold off their ceiling. Not 30%. Not 40%. Over 50% of their total gross income vaporizes into rent before they've even bought a single granola bar or paid for their kids' daycare. And if you're a young couple, 18 to 24, trying to start a life, well, good luck. That number rockets up to nearly 1 in 2. Half your paycheck, gone. Not hypothetically. Not in some doomsday scenario. This is happening right now, according to a nationwide survey of renters in the summer of 2025. The math is officially bankrupt. The Canadian rental crisis has reached a terrifying stage where millions of households are in a financial vice grip, being squeezed by rent increases that chew up their budget faster than their wages can possibly grow. You are running out of runway. And this is the story of how Canada went from a tight market to financially impossible. If you're currently choosing between saving for a down payment and, eating, hit that subscribe button. Because here, we don't just talk about the crisis, we equip you to survive it. How in the frozen hell did a country that once prided itself on being accessible, a beacon of middle-class opportunity, become a place where a professional with a great job can't even secure a basic one-bedroom apartment? Where we're forcing families to play a gruesome game of rent or groceries. Where seniors, the people who actually built this country, are being unceremoniously evicted from the homes they've occupied for decades because their fixed income is now laughable against market rates. The truth is messy, and it's not the villain you think it is. Forget the singular evil landlord or the lazy renter narrative you hear in the comments section. This is a terrifying cocktail of factors: central bank rate decisions, massive population shifts, skyrocketing construction costs, and market mechanics that all perfectly align to create a systemic catastrophe. This affects every single province, every municipality, and millions of Canadians who, by all accounts, did everything right, yet still find themselves teetering on the cliff edge of financial ruin. Are your landlords demanding more than your firstborn child? Tell me your city and the percentage your rent jumped this year in the comments below. The scale of the financial hemorrhaging people are sharing is truly shocking. To truly grasp the abyss we've fallen into, we have to look at the old measuring stick. For decades, housing experts operated on a simple, sacred rule: shelter costs should not surpass 30% of your gross household income. That was the line in the sand. Cross that, and you were officially considered to be in core housing need, spending far too much relative to what you earn. Today, the 30% guideline feels like an archaic joke, a relic from a timeline where things made sense. In Vancouver, if you want the average one-bedroom apartment, which is currently clocking in around $2,896 per month, you would need to earn a household income of roughly $115,840 annually just to meet that ancient 30% benchmark. Now, for some brutal context, the median individual income across Canada sits at around $62,250. The math stopped working years ago, and the deficit is widening every single month. But here is the critical difference between this housing crisis and all the ones that came before. Previous affordability squeezes were localized, isolated outbreaks of financial pain. You'd see Vancouver's market boil over, but Calgary would remain reasonably priced. Toronto would surge, yet Montreal offered a sensible alternative. That geographical escape hatch is officially sealed. Data from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC, confirms that every single province in the nation now has vacancy rates sitting below the critical 3% level, the percentage that defines a healthy, stable market. This isn't a regional hotspot anymore, it is a nationwide financial inferno. Look, if you're panicking about getting caught in this ongoing rental collapse and you're considering the jump to ownership, you have to protect yourself. I've compiled a completely free guide that outlines the 7 critical mistakes that can absolutely destroy a new home investment, covering everything from timing your entry to understanding true carrying costs and avoiding getting trapped in negative equity. It could legitimately save you tens of thousands of dollars. Grab it right now from the first link in the description, or click the card that's popping up on the screen. The tragic foundation for today's rental crisis was laid down during the chaotic years of the pandemic, but the mechanism wasn't what most people intuitively understand. Back when COVID-19 first hit in 2020, Canada's rental market actually eased. It was bizarrely relaxed. Vacancy rates temporarily climbed because international students packed up and went home, temporary foreign workers departed, and many renters chose to move back in with family to save money during the uncertainty. By 2021, the national vacancy rate had actually rebounded to a relatively healthy 3.1%, the best it had been in years. We had a brief window of air. And then, the floodgates opened, and the whole system terrifyingly reversed. By 2022, vacancy rates had plunged to a harrowing 1.9%. By 2023, they bottomed out at 1.5%, a number that hasn't been seen since the CMHC first began systematically tracking this data back in 1988. So, what exactly drove the car off the cliff? It wasn't one event, it was the simultaneous, perfect convergence of three monumental, irresistible forces. First, immigration went into hyperdrive. Canada aggressively opened its doors, welcoming over 1 million newcomers in 2023, an absolute record in our nation's history. These new residents, quite logically, started their lives as renters, instantly consuming available housing and drastically tightening the market supply overnight. Second, the international student enrollment didn't just return, it exploded. Post-secondary institutions, seeing the financial incentive, expanded their intake aggressively, particularly in high-demand cities like Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, adding another layer of massive, concentrated rental demand exactly where supply was already weakest. Third, and arguably the most punishing factor, was the sudden, crippling unaffordability of home ownership. The pandemic years saw a frenzy of buying fueled by ultra-low interest rates. Many buyers secured mortgages at 1.9% or 2.5%. But as the Bank of Canada aggressively raised the policy rate to battle inflation, those same rates soared past 5% and higher. A household that could once secure financing for an $800,000 home at pandemic rates suddenly found themselves qualified for maybe $500,000. Thousands of would-be buyers were instantly and violently ejected from the ownership market, forcing them to stay put and compete for the exact same rental properties as the record number of newcomers and students. The outcome was chillingly predictable. Vacancy rates collapsed, and rental prices absolutely detonated. In 2023, the average rent for a two-bedroom, purpose-built apartment surged by 8% nationally, the highest single-year increase since 1990. And that's not 8% over 5 years, that's 8% in 12 months, dwarfing the 3.1% inflation rate and the 4.8% wage growth rate. The gap between your pay stub and your landlord's bill widened violently. But statistics alone don't capture the human devastation. Think about a family in Toronto who was paying $2,400 per month for their two-bedroom in 2022. That 8% hike meant their rent jumped to $2,592 by 2023. That's an extra $192 monthly, or $2,304 annually. For a household earning $60,000 a year, that single year's increase is nearly 4% of their entire gross income, eaten up by housing. Now, let that compounding horror sink in. Between 2021 and 2024, rent growth has brutally outpaced wage growth for 3 consecutive years. While wages have crept up at about 4% to 5% per year, rents have surged faster in virtually every major city. The gap is relentless, and it's slowly consuming the middle class. Here is where the data shifts from alarming to genuinely terrifying. According to the Rentals.ca Summer 2025 survey, 34% of all Canadian renters are now devoting more than half of their after-tax income to rent. Just stop and process that. 1 in every 3 renters has now crossed a threshold where their housing costs consume the majority of their income. They are not just over the 30% affordability guideline, they are nearing double it. For the youngest renters, the situation is a complete financial disaster. Nearly 49% of those aged 18 to 24 are spending over half their income on rent. These aren't people living lavishly, they are students, entry-level workers, and young professionals who are slashing every other expense, finding roommates, and still drowning financially because rent alone devours half their earnings. The resulting social chaos is profound. Statistics Canada data from October 2025 highlights a staggering chasm. Renters who recently moved into a unit are paying substantially more than long-standing, established tenants. The financial disparity between a new renter, less than 1 year tenure, and a veteran renter, 5+ years, has ballooned from a 7% difference in 1996 to a crushing 34% difference in 2021. Given the explosions in rent since 2021, that gulf is likely far wider today. This phenomenon creates what economists darkly call housing lock-in. Renters who are lucky enough to be protected by rent control are clinging desperately to their units because moving means exposing themselves to current market rates, which could be 30% to 50% higher. Consequently, families stay in inadequate, cramped, or distant apartments, even when they desperately need more space, or when a better job opportunity exists in another city. The market is brutally punishing mobility. The inequality this breeds is staggering. Imagine two identical units in a Vancouver apartment tower. The tenant who moved in 5 years ago might be paying $1,800 monthly, benefiting from rent control caps. Their neighbor, who just moved in this year, is paying $2,400. Same unit, same building, but the newcomer pays 33% more solely based on the timing of their move. This creates a deeply fractured, two-tier system where long-term tenants are essentially prisoners of their leases, while newcomers face punishing, career-stalling costs that make it impossible to save. By 2025, the rental crisis wasn't just a market problem, it was a societal wound at peak intensity. The data from Toronto, Canada's largest rental market and the ultimate canary in the coal mine, shows a grim reality. Over 40% of all renters in the city are now classified as being in core housing need. This isn't a marginalized few, this is nearly half of the city's renting population struggling just to keep their heads above water. The emotional and financial strain is crippling. A 2023 Abacus data survey revealed that 79% of low-income renters, those earning $50,000 or less, live in constant fear about their ability to make the next rent payment. For young renters, the anxiety is near universal. That number leaps to an almost unbelievable 93%. These aren't abstract financial worries, these are parents lying awake at 3 a.m. running the gruesome calculation for next month's payment. The fear extends beyond the present. The same study found that 75% of low-income renters are terrified of potential rent increases that could finally push them over the edge, and 57% worry about losing their rental unit entirely because alternatives are virtually non-existent in a market with sub-2% vacancy rates. The long-term economic damage is profound. The research found that 78% of low-income renters are concerned about the permanent impact of housing costs on their overall financial stability. When your shelter expenses consume half your income, there is zero capacity for saving, zero ability to invest, and zero chance of building generational wealth. The housing crisis isn't merely impoverishing people month to month, it's actively preventing the accumulation of wealth and trapping millions of families in a cruel cycle of financial precarity. Other data confirms the structural damage. Statistics Canada research found that among young Canadians facing financial difficulty, 55% report that they want to buy a home or move to a more suitable rental but are entirely blocked by the relentless march of rising prices. The rental crisis is acting as a brutal economic mobility killer for the younger demographic. Perhaps the most heartbreaking metric is the decline in simple happiness. Life satisfaction among Canadians aged 18 to 34 dropped 12 percentage points between 2021 and early 2024, according to Statistics Canada. Only 1 in 3 young adults reports high life satisfaction now, compared to nearly half just 3 years prior. While multiple issues contribute to low morale, the correlation with housing stress is undeniable and severe. And the crisis isn't contained to renters. It infects the entire housing ecosystem. High rent makes it impossible for renters to save for a down payment, keeping them locked in the rental pool longer. But conversely, the sheer terror of perpetual rent hikes pushes those who can scrape together a down payment to flee into ownership, viewing it as the only viable escape from the financial treadmill. CMHC data brutally crystallizes the supply problem. Purpose-built rental construction in 2023 added fewer than 40,000 new units nationwide. In the same year, Canada added over 1 million people. The supply-demand imbalance is a mathematical certainty, not a debate. Even when you generously count condo rentals and secondary suites, the new supply barely scratches the surface of the new demand. This is compounded by the crippling cost of construction. Industry estimates show that building a new rental apartment in a major Canadian city now costs between $400 and $500 per square foot in basic hard construction costs alone. Once you factor in land, municipal fees, financing, and a developer's modest profit, units must sell for $1,100 plus per square foot to be viable. But based on the current median renter income, they can only afford units priced around $700 to $900 per square foot. The gap is insurmountable through market forces alone. The rental crisis is radically reshaping Canadian society in ways that will scar us for decades. The most immediate impact is on family life. Research clearly indicates that young Canadians are delaying marriage, delaying having children, and staying with their parents longer, specifically because of the prohibitive cost of housing. Fewer children means slowing population growth, which eventually starves economic growth, tax revenues, and social program sustainability. Moreover, the crisis is turbocharging inequality. Homeowners, especially those who bought pre-2020, have seen their wealth explode as property values soared. Renters, meanwhile, are seeing their savings capacity vanish as escalating costs eat their income. The gap between older and younger Canadians, and between different ethnic and income groups, is widening at an unprecedented, sickening pace. The data shows that children of homeowners are significantly more likely to become homeowners themselves, turning the rental crisis into a mechanism that creates a bifurcated society, a class of homeowners who transfer wealth via property, and a class of permanent renters unable to accumulate assets. This is no longer just a housing issue, it's the erosion of the middle-class economic dream that defined Canada. The geographic pressure is also acute. The high costs in Vancouver and Toronto are violently pushing workers into smaller cities, immediately crashing the affordability of previously moderate markets. Cities like Halifax, which once served as a financial relief valve, are now buckling under their own housing crises as interprovincial migration overwhelms local supply. The squeeze is officially nationalized. Finally, the mental health toll is documented and severe. Multiple studies link chronic housing stress to increased anxiety, depression, and reduced overall well-being. When families live in constant terror of eviction, when parents ration meals to make rent, and when young adults are forced to abandon career ambitions because they can't afford to live in cities where opportunities exist, these are not just economic problems. They are social, psychological, and moral crises that permanently lower the quality and trajectory of life. So, where do we go from the edge of this abyss? The immediate trajectory, frankly, is not encouraging without sustained, major intervention. On the supply side, the construction of purpose-built rentals has been increasing. 2024 saw the fastest rental construction growth in 30 years, clocking in at 4.1%. But even this unprecedented boom is a drop in the ocean. To simply keep pace with our current population growth, even with reduced immigration targets, Canada needs to be constructing over 300,000 housing units annually. Our current construction rate sits around 240,000 units total, including both ownership and rental. The math is clear, the rental crisis will persist for years, even in optimistic scenarios. If we maintain our current, elevated construction rates and follow the government's plan to slow immigration, vacancy rates might gradually inch their way from the disastrous 1.5% towards a healthier 2.5% or 3%, but that projection puts the recovery time frame somewhere around 2027 or 2028. That means years of tight markets, continuous rent hikes, and millions of families struggling under this suffocating financial weight. A few modest glimmers of relief have appeared. Rents have recently softened in a few major markets as of 2025. Vancouver's average one-bedroom rent dropped to $2,896, a 13% decline from its peak. Toronto hit a 30-month low at $2,615. These dips reflect slower demand as some people, utterly priced out, finally leave major cities or move back in with family. But this is the crucial catch: declining average asking rents do not help the struggling individual renter. That number only applies to new listings. Existing tenants still face annual increases that are capped by rent control, but which are consistently set above inflation. And that 13% decline in Vancouver? The peak was $3,330. Dropping to $2,896 means a one-bedroom is still dangerously close to $3,000 a month, still completely unaffordable for anyone earning the median income. The Bank of Canada's rate cuts through 2024 and 2025, which brought the policy rate down to 2.25% by late 2025, were supposed to be the cavalry. Theoretically, lower rates reduce mortgage costs for highly leveraged landlords, potentially slowing the need for rent increases. They also make it slightly easier for renters to save for a down payment and transition into ownership, thereby reducing rental demand. However, the impact is slow and limited. The vast majority of rental buildings are financed with long-term fixed-rate debt, meaning rate cuts do not immediately lower the landlord's cost of carrying the building. And for renters already devoting half their income to shelter, saving an extra $50 or $100 a month from slightly lower borrowing costs doesn't solve a crisis rooted in the $1,000 rent hike they faced last year. The CMHC projects that rental supply growth will continue strongly through 2026 and 2027, which should ease some pressure. But the corporation also warns that construction costs remain stubbornly elevated. Material costs, pervasive labor shortages, and slow municipal permitting fees haven't magically disappeared. Even with lower interest rates, building remains financially punitive. What about policy solutions? Provinces have strengthened rent control, which helps existing tenants but often disincentivizes new rental construction. Other jurisdictions are fighting for zoning reform to allow denser building, which helps long-term supply but takes years to move from the drawing board to the finished foundation. Federal programs, like the removal of Gulf Standard Time/Hawaii Standard Time on new rental construction, are having a modest positive impact, contributing to the 2024 construction surge. But the scale of these incentives is simply not enough to close the chasm between the cost to build and the affordable rent price without aggressive public subsidy. Many analysts argue for a radical intervention: direct, massive public construction of deeply affordable, non-market rental housing, substantial operational subsidies to non-profit providers, or tax policies that actively discourage speculative ownership and reward purpose-built rentals. The Parliamentary Budget Officer estimates Canada has only about 600,000 to 700,000 social housing units, a number that has barely moved in decades, despite the population swelling by millions. Advocates argue that without a substantial expansion of non-market housing, no amount of private sector construction will ever solve affordability for lower and moderate-income Canadians. Fundamentally, the rental crisis is a story of profound systemic imbalance. For decades, Canada failed to build enough housing to match its population growth. The shortage was hidden, masked by local variations and temporary market fluctuations. The pandemic brutally ripped away the mask, exposing the underlying, vast deficit. When demand surged post-COVID and supply had no means to quickly respond, rents detonated, and vacancy rates collapsed. Millions of families are now paying the ultimate price. The crisis will not resolve itself quickly. Even with increased building, even with slower immigration, the rental market will be punishingly tight for years. Vacancy rates will not return to the healthy 3% level soon, and rents will not naturally fall back to truly affordable levels for a median income earner without truly dramatic political and financial intervention. The consequence for the individual renter is stark: the squeeze continues. Families already spending 50% of their income on rent will continue to bear that burden, forced to sacrifice other basic necessities or take on debt just to survive. Young renters will continue to delay every life milestone: their career, their marriage, their family, all constrained by housing costs that eliminate any possibility of saving or long-term planning. For our society, the rental crisis represents a fundamental, catastrophic failure of housing as a social necessity. When 1 in 3 of your renters sacrifices over half their income for shelter, you are no longer operating a functional market. You are presiding over a crisis of basic human need. And when that crisis is allowed to persist for years, grinding down millions of families, it corrodes our social fabric and our economic vitality in ways that reach far beyond the housing market itself. The crisis is solvable, but the solutions demand sustained political courage, substantial financial commitment, and patience for large-scale policies to bear fruit. In the meantime, Canadian renters will continue to endure the relentless weight of a system that has failed to provide the most essential human requirement, affordable shelter. One final thought: this rental crisis connects directly to mortgage affordability because the squeezed renters eventually look to ownership, only to find those costs have also surged. The Bank of Canada's recent rate cut to 2.25% was supposed to be a lifeline, but it's actually backfiring on homeowners. My latest video breaks down the brutal math of why that rate cut is ironically leading to skyrocketing mortgage renewal payments, up by $800 plus monthly for many, even as the central bank attempts to provide relief. The numbers will genuinely surprise you. It's on the screen now. I'll see you there.